just carry your little sign around with you?
Probably the day after that.
That's all it takes.
Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, September 9th, 2013 Washougal City Council meeting. I would ask that you all please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger?
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee?
Here.
Councilmember Flinsky?
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay?
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker?
Here.
Councilmember Freeman?
We did have information from Councilmember Freeman that she is out of town this evening. She is going to try and dial in for a portion of the meeting later this evening. Is there a motion from council to excuse the council member?
So move. Second.
We've got a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Freeman from the meeting at this time. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Amendments to the agenda. We do have one item that I would like to add to the agenda as new item E under new business, which would be the continuation of our fire and EMS discussions from our workshop. With that, are there any other amendments to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to move new business item E up to immediately following the first public comments.
The entire budget discussion
Yes.
prior to our public hearings? You have public hearings scheduled for 7 o'clock. You've also got consultants that are here that we certainly are paying for all the time that they're here.
I'm a little concerned that we keep finding ways to postpone or move to the latest possible moment in the meeting the discussion of budgets. Council has been, I think, fairly upfront about our desire to have these discussions early and in some depth. And I'm just concerned that it's not happening. For example, we had a long discussion about fire consolidation, and I was a lot more prepared to have the budgets discussed in that session than the fire consolidation, which doesn't strike me as being something of the kind of immediacy as the general discussions of the budget. So, you know, I'm certainly willing to do the public hearings according to schedule, but budget is a very high priority, and it keeps getting pushed off. And I'm done.
Well, may I add
Sure.
to that? I'm not sure I completely agree with Councilmember Greenlee. I don't think a lot of these hearings should take that much time, but I am concerned with 6 substantial budget topics set on our agenda in one night, and I don't know that we have time to do justice to them all in any case. I just wondered if we might want to, I know Councilmember Greenlee doesn't want to defer the budget discussions, but I wonder if we want to set these aside for 2 weeks and just discuss them in more depth and just do the public hearing matters tonight.
We could certainly do whatever is the pleasure of the council. It certainly is not the administration's stand that we have been pushing off any discussions. If you'll all remember, we actually were trying to bring those to you much earlier. I believe I have communications from council members that said that the budget is not nearly as important as a change in our form of government, and that you were fine having those moved. So we're here to do whatever you all would like. We certainly have all of the department heads here, with the exception of Human Resources.
Maybe just as a reminder, we have a series of discussions scheduled for the budget. Tonight's discussion is not the presentation of the 2014 budget. As you recall from our last meeting, we provided some context last week, and then we mentioned that we were, for context, going to do relatively quick walkthroughs of the 2013 budgets, the general fund operating budgets for our departments. Jeanette had a previous commitment, couldn't be here tonight, so she went to provide an example of what that would be last week. We would do these presentations this week, and then there are 3-4 more in sessions that are scheduled for budget conversations, and taken in their totality, we hope that we're going to serve you well in terms of the in-depth conversations that you want to have. But tonight, in and of itself, isn't designed to be that exclusively.
Joyce?
I feel that taking 6 like this at the end of the evening is going to be just very cursory attention to each one and not time to discuss it. And it is a discussion, and I think we need to break these down so we have time to hear the information and discuss it in a manner that is meaningful to us, that are, even if we're building information for later other meetings. This is, I just thought it seemed like a lot.
Can I ask a quick question? For clarification, do you have prepared presentations on each of these 6 departments?
Yes.
Okay, and what is the approximate time for each of those presentations?
I think it would range from 5 minutes for the shortest one to 20 minutes for the longest one.
Wow.
Could we have those presentations in our Dropbox?
They should be in the Dropbox.
Are they?
Yeah, and mine's still continuing to download. It's modified 2 hours ago.
I'm not sure we have time for meaningful review of these. So I would move that we dispense with those items, send our department heads home, and proceed with the public hearings, unless there's a couple short ones we could do, and then defer 4 of them for later.
Whatever you want to do, I would ask that we, get through that part of the agenda and then do 1 or 2 and see how it goes. And but before, we should decide if it's going to be 2 or 1 so that some could go home. Let me look at the order again.
Fire, then police.
The fire one is actually a relatively short presentation. I think it's 5 slides. The police one is a little bit longer because there's animal control and the court system, but there's just 1 slide each for those. Public Works is the lengthier one. It's got multiple programs in the general fund. Finance and administration are really straightforward as well. So we could defer Public Works, police, and then try to do the other ones.
Let's try that. I suggest we try that. So, Chief?
Okay, so are we leaving the agenda as is, with the exception of the fire and EMS item being added to the new business?
Aren't we taking off Public Works and,
Those I've already crossed off.
oh, sorry.
Okay,
Sounds good.
we do have two proclamations this evening. The first one for Suicide Prevention Week. I'll apologize up front. I've had a horrible cold for the last week, so we're going to try and get through all these. Proclamation for Suicide Prevention Week, September 8th through the 14th, 2013. Whereas in the state of Washington, suicide is the 8th leading cause of all deaths, the 2nd leading cause of death among ages 15 to 24, and the 3rd leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 14. And whereas friends and family members can help prevent suicide by knowing the risk factors, a history of depression and/or other mental illness, alcohol or drug use, family history of suicide or violence, physical illness, and feeling alone. And whereas the number of suicides is increasing among people ages 50 and over, American Indians, and the gay, lesbian, transgender, bi populations. And whereas 50% of Washingtonians who die by suicide use a firearm, and 78% of those are males. And whereas there are 6 military bases in Washington, and nationally 1 service member dies by suicide every 36 hours. And whereas the stigma associated with mental illness often discourages people at risk for suicide from seeking life-saving help. And whereas suicide can traumatize survivors and create a ripple effect in the community. And whereas far too many Washington residents die by suicide each year, and most of these deaths are preventable, now therefore, I, Sean Gard, Mayor of the City of Washougal, do hereby proclaim September 8th through the 14th, 2013 as Suicide Prevention Week in Washington, and call on residents to help increase awareness in your community about suicide, learn the signs and symptoms of suicide, and talk with friends and family, and refer people who may need help to the appropriate resources. Is there anyone here this evening to receive this proclamation? Okay. Our second proclamation this evening is on Constitution Week, September 15th to the 21st, 2013. Whereas September 17th, 2013 marks the 226th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention, and whereas it is fitting and proper to accord official recognition to this magnificent document in its memorable anniversary, and to the patriotic celebrations which will commemorate the occasion, and whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuing of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America designating September 17th through the 23rd as Constitution Week, now therefore I, Sean Gard, Mayor of the City of Washougal, Washington, do hereby proclaim the week of September 17th through the 23rd as Constitution Week, and ask our citizens to reaffirm the ideals of the framers of the Constitution in 1787 by vigilantly protecting the freedoms guaranteed to us through this guardian of our liberties, remembering that lost rights may never be regained. Okay, that will bring us to public comments. Before we invite anyone up to the microphone, I did want to go over what we did in our workshop session just prior to this session. We had a discussion in regards to a interlocal agreement with the Washougal School District. We had a discussion on a development agreement for the Hamilton Mill property, which will come back to council at our next council meeting for a public hearing on that development agreement. And then we also started some discussions in regards to our fire and EMS consolidation efforts with the City of Camas, and those discussions will continue as part of this meeting. With that, are there any members of the public that would like to address council this evening? Kevin?
Good evening. Kevin Bergstrom. I live at 1210 Northeast 277th Avenue and part-time over here at State 171. I represent... There we go. Are we live now?
Yep.
I represent all the full-time employed firefighters in both Washougal, Camas, and additionally in East County. And it's a job I don't take lightly, but what I'd like to convey to you folks tonight is The membership that I represent supports the fully merged department that has been proposed here tonight. I believe it was option 1 on your list. We've spent nearly 3 years proving the concept as an organization. The experts tonight have already told you, and you'll probably hear a little bit more, that it's the best possible model for service delivery, patient outcomes, fire suppression efficiencies, training, prevention, inspections, and administration. I would just like to say, after the countless studies and more than 2 years of success, and after hearing from the experts attending tonight, I would believe that you've heard all the possible alternatives and should support the consolidated merged department and allow us to move forward. You know, one of the things that strikes me, somebody from the group this morning, or earlier this afternoon, I believe it was Larry Sari, said, it's very difficult as an organization for the chief to provide some sort of strategic plan. The organization, the department, as it were right now, is treading water, and that's very, very unproductive, and it's very difficult to plan. We need your support. We need to proceed forward with this already proven merged department so that we can move forward with our organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other members of the public that would like to address council? Not your only opportunity. There is another one before the end of the meeting as well. Okay, seeing no others, we will move to the consent agenda. This evening it has 5 items on it. Our workshop meeting minutes of August 26th, our council minutes of August 26th, regular accounts payable claims in the amount of $146,719.64. Agenda Bill 39-13, an agenda bill setting a public hearing for a development agreement between Killian Pacific and the Port of Camas-Washougal for Parker's Landing, and Agenda Bill 40-13, an interlocal agreement with the City of Camas for animal control services. Council?
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that we approve the consent agenda as read. Did you have an interest in item D?
Not particularly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hearing no objections, so ordered. The consent agenda is adopted. Moving to new business items, Agenda Bill 41-13, a resolution on first responders. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Before you tonight is a resolution regarding the importance of first responders and emergency personnel in the community. And I'll leave the staff report at that. The recommended action is after the mayor reads the resolution, so we won't be asking for a motion to read it by title only. The mayor's going to read the resolution. Then the recommended action would be to pass and post the resolution in the usual manner.
A resolution recognizing and acknowledging the importance of first responder emergency personnel to the quality of life in the City of Washougal. Whereas the City of Washougal's first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and volunteers rest their own safety and personal property in the execution of their duties to protect the public on a daily basis. And whereas the City of Washougal's first responders are the first line of defense for the public against threats, both domestic and foreign. And whereas the City of Washougal's first responders are charged with heavy responsibility for public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the City of Washougal. And whereas the City of Washougal's first responders stand at the ready to come to the aid of the citizens of Washougal 24 hours a day. And whereas the City of Washougal's first responders work daily to protect our citizens from potential harm and treat those who have been injured or suffered health emergencies, all of which entails significant personal risk. And whereas the City of Washougal's first responders maintain high standards of qualifications and performance through frequent and intensive training. And whereas as we approach the anniversary of 9/11, we are mindful of the many sacrifices the first responders make in the protection of fellow citizens. Now therefore, be it resolved by the City Council for the City of Washougal, Washington as follows. That the City Council hereby recognizes and commends the service of our first responders, not only as that of faithful employees and volunteers, but also the exemplary conduct to be admired and emulated by the citizens of the City of Washougal. and with the approaching anniversary of the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center and other affected targets, Council recognizes this as an appropriate time to recognize the work of first responders and the sacrifices that they and their families are called upon to make to safeguard their fellow citizens. Council?
Move for approval.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second for approval. Any council discussion?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I noticed in my email late this afternoon that there is a recognition breakfast planned for Wednesday morning. It's entirely possible that I missed it if it was announced earlier, but I haven't seen anything about that until today, and it seems short notice.
We actually have had one for the since 9/11, 2002. There's been one on the morning of 9/11 at 8 o'clock in the morning at the fire station. Previously, it's been held at Camas. It's held at Washougal this year. It's not a recognition ceremony as much as it is a memorial ceremony with a breakfast that follows that's been put on by the firefighters every year that I can remember.
It would just be nice to be kept informed so that we can run our calendars.
We can certainly do that. I would say if you want to place it on your calendars at this point, September 11th of next year, and for as many years as the Firefighters Association puts it on, I would say that you could probably count on there being something at 8 o'clock in the morning in front of one of the two fire stations. Kevin, would that?
Yeah, that ceremony that Sean's speaking about has been put on by our local, between Camas and Washougal over the years, and we've given out public notice. I know the Post has run it in the years past. Last year was at Camas, this year it's in Washougal, 8 o'clock in the morning. Everyone's welcome to attend, and the labor group provides breakfast for those in attendance.
Any other comments or questions from council? Okay, I've got a motion and a second to pass and post the resolution in the usual manner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Second item is Agenda Bill 42-13, a development agreement for the Schmid Columbia River development. Mr. Knipe.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Development agreement before you this evening regarding the Schmid Columbia River is an agreement that would vest the subject properties to the development standards that we have in place, the date of this agreement. And in return, the city would receive an easement for a public access trail across the properties. Said properties, there are six of them, Washougal River Road, located on the, it's not going to work for me, I'm sorry. Along the east is Washougal River Road or Steamboat Landing. North is the Columbia River, or excuse me, SR 14. South is the Columbia River, and south, the easterly extension of South A Street is on the west side. This is an exhibit for the proposed trail. As noted in the development agreement, the exact location of the proposed trail is not set. It'll be set at the time when we get out there and start looking at it and see how it will meander through the trees and whatnot. But this gives the general indication of where the trail most likely would be located. The draft development agreement was originally submitted in December of 2012 and combined SEPA notice of application, or excuse me, combined notice of application and optional SEPA determination of non-significance was issued on January 11, 2013. The work session, we held a work session with City Council back in January of this year. However, during that SEPA comment period, we got several comments that I'll speak to in a little bit, but we got one that was requested that the Department of Ecology assume lead agency regarding SEPA. We took pause at that moment, had several discussions with legal counsel and as well as the applicant, and it was decided to wait. The applicant then went off on their own fruition and resolved several of those issues, the majority of which, and we received comment from the applicant's attorney, or the commenter's attorney, that all of those objections to the development agreement were retracted, and therefore we moved it forward at that time, or at this time. So, as I said the last time when we had the work session on the 26th, we're moving forward again, and notice of the public hearing was published on August 30th of 2013. The recommended action is to hold a public hearing to take public testimony, and if council desires to make a motion to read the resolution by title only and pass post the resolution in the usual manner. I did want to, before we get into the public hearing portion, in the agenda bill, in your agenda bill, I referenced several of the public comments, and I respond in there as well. A lot of the issues were raised were related to views, environment, and trail, the trail in and of itself. And it's important to remember that the property is zoned R115, single-family residential. Given the number of lots that they have there, they can develop as residential. I think, as I mentioned last time, the private agreement between the property owner and the neighboring property limits the development to only 3 single-family residences. But the fact is that they can develop that as single-family residences today. They do not need this development agreement. The development agreement only cements the city's ability to have and obtain the trail across this property. If you remember from the work session, I spoke about how this trail connection would connect on the east side with the Dyke Trail, heading all the way out to the gorge, and then ultimately to the east along A Street. And as we discussed in tonight's work session with the port, their plans for public trail and amenities, park amenities on their property. And so this is an integral piece of this trail system. And so, again, if you choose not to approve the development agreement, the applicant can build their residences, and we then would have to look at other alternatives to provide a trail system through the location. With the approval of the development agreement, the applicant would build their residences, and we would secure the easement for the trail. So with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Mitch. With that, I will open the public hearing and ask that any members of the public who wish to speak on this development agreement, please step forward to the microphone, give your name and address, and your testimony. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is John Hines. I live at 954 South A Street, Washougal. I am the adjoining neighbor, and in a letter dated July 25th, my attorney sent that my wife and I hereby retract all objections to this development agreement. I absolutely stand by that statement. My presence here should not imply anything other than my support for this development agreement, nor should anything I say imply anything other than support for the agreement. My only concern is, and by the way, my wife, my kids, and I are for the trails, but I am to the west of the trails, not South A Street. And the only thing that I had concern about was the presumption of use of my private property. It's presumed, the trail today, per the maps and the drawings that the city and the county have. That bothers me. And I've seen government make plans and things meet up on one side and meet up on the middle, and a private citizen's stuck in the middle. I'm for it. I want to work with the city. I would have appreciated a phone call, some way to work this out, and just, you know, establish that dotted line, that communication. So that's all I have to say. I'm really happy. We're going to get some trails. I'm looking forward to it. We want to use them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mitch, is the trail not destined to be on A Street along that area, not along private property?
Yes, and I guess that's the thing that I'd like to state, is that what you can notice within the exhibits that, and I know it's really hard to see, and I don't think I can zoom on this, but the easement, the proposed easement that the Schmids are providing does not extend all the way to A Street. and it doesn't presume to go across Mr. Hines' property. If we were to, you recall our discussions related to park capital facility plans and trails, if we were to do those things, we would have to approach those private property owners in order to do that. In the past, there has been some discussion with possible land swaps with the state that would be north, just to the north west of this, that would basically take that trail off of the easterly or westerly extension of this, north of Mr. Hines' property, and then in the state right-of-way, then ultimately connecting with A Street. But if that didn't work and we had to look at acquisition of property, we would have to approach Mr. Hines to have that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the public that would like to address the agenda item? Larry.
Good evening, Council. Larry Keister, 4402 Southeast Sitzelberger Road, Washougal. I urge you to pass this resolution. The port has been diligently working over the last 5 years to discuss the economic benefits to the community of the trail system. This piece of property fits into an overall plan that would link Steamboat Landing with the port property encompassing the Heritage Park. It would move on to the east into Steigerwald. It would move on from Steigerwald to the proposed Washougal to Stevenson Trail system encompassing the Cape Horn Trail. Then when Camas was approached as to the Town to Trails project, they were very excited about being included with their trail system. It comes from Lacamas Lake down to the waterfront. So that would encompass the entire community. So this is an important little piece in that overall development of the trail system. Why do we need the trail system in the community? It brings economic benefits to the community. People come to enjoy the beautiful scenery that we have here. They come to enjoy the gorge. They come to enjoy the waterfront that is public access at this time, which is it's so important to the port, and to enjoy the Steigerwald Wildlife Refuge. So this brings people to our community. It retains the people that already live here, that enjoy the benefits and the amenities that we have. So I urge you to continue with this, with the development of this trail. And thank you, Mr. Knipe, for the explanation of exactly what it is. The houses are probably going to be built anyway. That's the economy of the thing. But let's make sure that we have that easement for the trail. It's very, very critical.
Thank you, Larry. Any other members of the public that would like to speak on the item? Okay, this is a final call for any members of the public that would like to speak to Agenda Bill 42-13, a development agreement for the Schmid-Columbia River development. Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing. Turn the matter to council.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that we read the resolution by title only.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to sign a development agreement with Schmid CR, LLC, and Emma Schmid.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we pass and post the resolution in the usual manner.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to pass and post the resolution in the usual manner. Any council discussion? Dave?
I just wanted to comment on the fact that this was a long and hotly contested issue. And I'm amazed that you were able to come to an agreement. I'm thrilled that you were able to come to an agreement. And I greatly admire you for coming to an agreement. And I'm sure as heck going to vote for this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You bet. Any other council comments, questions? Okay, I've got a motion and a second to pass and post the resolution in the usual manner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving to Agenda Bill 43-13, an ordinance amending Washougal Municipal Code 2.44.090 cemetery charges. Good evening, Trevor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening, we're looking at Municipal Code 244090 in regards to amending the lot prices for the niche walls, specifically for the new columbariums. We procured earlier this year for 2 additional units at the cemetery. The cost associated with that reflects in the proposed amendment. So you'll see the change from $550 for a single unit to $650, and there's a discounted price for a double unit. Rather than being $1,000, it's $1,170. So for this evening, the recommended action is to read the ordinance by title only and pass, post, and publish in the usual manner.
Thank you, Trevor.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that we read the ordinance by title only.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
An ordinance amending Washougal Municipal Code 2.44.090 to modify charges for the cemetery lots and services.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we pass, post, and publish the ordinance in the usual manner.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to pass, post, and publish the ordinance in the usual manner. Any council discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to Agenda Bill 44-13, an ordinance amending Washougal Municipal Code 3.88.050, community garden fees. Trevor.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, looking at the community gardens, in 2009, you can see from the original ordinance, we had a starter program or a feeder program to start that opportunity within the community. Over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been able to get it a little bit more precise as far as the costs to be able to maintain and administer that specific program as reflected in the proposed prices for those plots. You'll see a discount also for seniors as well. So again, for amendment of 388050, the recommended action this evening is to read the ordinance by title only and pass, post, and publish in the usual manner.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that we read the ordinance by title only.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
An ordinance amending Washougal Municipal Code 3.88.050 to modify the community garden plot annual fee.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we pass, post, and publish in the usual manner.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to pass, post, and publish the ordinance in the usual manner. Any council discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now going to a new agenda item, our continuation of our discussion on fire and EMS services. Good evening, Chiefs.
Thank you, Mayor. So we'll pick up where we left off with our presentation. We heard from the doctor. The next portion of the presentation is some comments from the chiefs about their assessment of service delivery as we ponder these different options, and then they'll come back to me for some concluding remarks, and then turn it back to the council for some discussion.
Thank you, David, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. It's been a while before we've been in front of you to talk about the continued partnership between both cities. Just briefly, when we started this whole process, I guess it was back in early 2011, you may recall, the 2 primary things that we were tasked with was to continue to provide the same or enhanced level of service at the same or less cost. And I think as we go through some of this, and most of this is not a surprise, these are data and statistics that you've seen in various presentations already. But I believe as we go through this, you'll see that, in my opinion anyway, we have definitely met those mandates. some of the things that we've managed to see, and it's one of the biggest questions that we've had throughout this process, is every so often somebody would ask us, okay, how's it going? What have you accomplished? Is it better or worse? Depending on the timing when those questions came in, sometimes certain things are hard to quantify. But now, after 2+ years, we definitely have some more concrete data to look at. One of the biggest things that we've seen since we've started this process is a faster ambulance response time to certain calls within Washougal, and that's because of that Medic 43, which is the Washougal ambulance that is stationed at Station 171, which is the fire station there on A Street. And just to look back at a full year of data, of course, we look back at 2012, where the data showed that Medic 43, again, the Washougal Medic Unit, responded on 1,234 ambulance calls. One of the first questions we had when we brought that up, when we first had that data available, was, well, how many of those calls were they actually responding in Washougal? Because Camas goes to Vancouver a lot, for instance. And actually what we found is 900 of those 1,234 calls were actually to calls within what is normally Station 171's primary response area. So what would have been Washougal's primary response area before the merger started. And what's particularly significant is that 316 of those calls were considered serious and were located east of 171, Station 171. The reason I point that out is calls that are located east of Station 171 are where there's going to be significant and substantial changes in response times by having an ambulance stationed at the Washougal Fire Station. So in 2012, on average, almost one person a day was suffering a serious medical emergency of some sort and was benefiting from significantly reduced response times by having that ambulance at the Washougal Fire Station. So that's a really good way to quantify some of the changes that we've seen just by having that ambulance there. And I don't know how to move this. Just tap it. Way too fancy for me. Okay. By having that ambulance there at Station 171, we've increased overall staffing at the station. And I'll turn to Chief Schumacher on this particular point, but prior to the consolidation, staffing at the Washougal Fire Station was a maximum of 3 and a minimum of 2. And you saw that how often, Ron?
50% of the time, the staffing levels at Station 171, we had 2 firefighters on duty, even though there was 3 assigned to that shift. But due to Kelly days and vacation and accrued leave time, 50% of the time, our staffing level was down to 2 from 3 FTEs.
And so what that's done now with the consolidation is the absolute minimum of staffing at Station 171 is 4. So you may have heard me say it at various other presentations over the last couple of years that we've basically doubled staffing. And so we've basically doubled staffing 50% of the time. So that's another substantial difference. That means you've got more people immediately available, unless they're already tasked with something else that are going to be available to answer calls, whether it be a fire or an ambulance call. You're going to have people closer by and closer to the scene of an incident when help is needed. Reduced overtime is another thing that we've seen, and this has always been one of the ones that's been sort of hard to quantify, and particularly in 2012 when we had so many people off on various injuries and illnesses, overtime got skewed. But what we've seen so far in 2013 is actually pretty remarkable, and it's something that we were hoping we would have saw in 2012 if the department overall had been healthier. But in Washougal right now, and this is projecting out, looking at where we're at in the year right now, we're projecting that we may see a possible reduction of about $55,000 in overtime expenses in Washougal. I don't have an estimate for you in Camas right now, but I can tell you that Camas is also substantially under budget for overtime right now. Now, the big question always comes up when we talk about that, well, how much can you tell us exactly how much of that you think is a result of the merger? And I can't, and I wouldn't even try to guess, because there's no way to quantify that. All I can tell you is that Chief Schumacher and myself agree that there's a significant portion of that that's related to the merger, but there's also a portion of it that's related to having the 3 additional SAFER hires. There's a portion of it that's related to having people that aren't injured right now. And they all come together to provide this cost savings, as decreased expenditures and overtime that we've experienced so far. Enhanced programs, in particular prevention and inspection programs. This is something that Camas has benefited from particularly because here in Washougal, Chief Schumacher has always maintained a pretty strong program in prevention and inspections when it comes to businesses, going out and checking the schools and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, in Camas, due to decreased staffing that Camas had over the last many years due to budget cuts, many inspections and prevention programs hadn't been done in years. For instance, business inspections hadn't been done in 6 years on average, whereas in Washougal, Chief Schumacher's always tried to get to those every 1 to 2 years maximum, right? Right. So that's one thing that Chief Schumacher's implemented over in Camas in particular that's helped us out quite a lot, and it's been very beneficial to us. Enhanced training. As a result of this merger, we appointed one of our existing existing captains. So we didn't have to hire anybody extra, but we appointed one of our captains to a day position working as the training captain. He organizes training for both departments, and actually Larry Sari, who was here and spoke to you earlier, he was our first training captain for our very first year, did some wonderful things, and then now Greg Payne is our current training captain. A couple big things that's managed to do for us, I'll just give you 2 examples. For instance, Camas avoided spending anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000 in having to train, in having to send the new SAFER hires off to the State Fire Academy, which would have been a substantial expense, which we avoided having to do because of the person working in this training captain position. On the other side, Captain Payne has done a very good job in organizing the volunteer training and having a focused person that plans those drills and organizes those drills, and sometimes he's out there instructing them himself. So those are just a couple examples of what that training program has managed to do. For instance, not just us either. East County Fire and Rescue has been able to take advantage of that position as well, and it's kind of interesting to see their personnel out at our training grounds participating in training with us as well. So that's a good sign, I believe. There's efficiencies in shared resources, various supplies and equipment that one department or another perhaps has not had to spend because the other department already had it. And there's way too many of those to list out, but there's been a lot of them that we've experienced over the last couple of years. And then finally, there's a potential for some rather significant long-term savings in capital facilities. And Paul alluded to this in the last presentation we had before the ad hoc committee, but depending on capital plans in both cities, there's a potential for the savings of millions of dollars when it comes to replacing things like fire stations and fire trucks. Fire stations in particular are quite expensive. So depending on the needs of the cities at the time, if there's a merged department and both cities are looking at having to replace a fire truck or would have had to look at replacing a fire truck on their own, maybe they only have to look at buying one new fire truck as a merged department. Maybe they only have to look at building one new fire station instead of 2 new fire stations if they're a merged department. So those are some things down the road that may be opportunities that a merged agency could take advantage of. And then it looks like this is the part that I look back over to Dave. And I don't know, Ron, do you have anything else to add?
No, just a little bit. The inspection program, we've been able to accomplish over 200 fire and life safety inspections in the city of Camas. As well, we enhanced our fire investigation. Now we have 3 fire investigators, and at a minimum anymore we need 2. So it was kind of hard to do it by myself prior to the merger. Now with firefighter Ostentowski and Deputy Fire Marshal Randy Miller, it's just been real beneficial to our needs as far as conducting fire investigations. So as far as the fire prevention arena, it's been real nice having an extra body or 2 extra bodies just to help out with inspections and plan plan reviews and fire investigations.
Joyce?
Chief Swinehart, tell me the situation with the volunteers. Are our volunteers being incorporated in Camas? Is Camas acquiring volunteers? How is this being affected?
Well, we just added more volunteers at the beginning of the year, as we do every year. We added another volunteer academy. On a day-to-day basis, actually almost daily now, especially over this summer, we've got volunteers assigned or working out of one of the Camas fire stations, or could be out of the Washougal fire station as well. Now, it's frequently the same, 3 or 4 people that are often doing that, and maybe they have work or school schedules that allow them to do that more. But that is something that we didn't see prior to the merger. Even though that opportunity, I believe, was always there for them to be able to sign up to do ride time, that was something we didn't have before the merger. So the efforts to continue to incorporate the volunteer program and find ways to enhance and grow that continue.
Dave, did you have more?
Just very briefly, just in summary for the presentation, we looked at those alternatives because those were what we thought were the viable alternatives. We're at a stage, as I mentioned, with the ad hoc committee process based on the charge of both councils that we were to develop a draft interlocal agreement. And the ad hoc committee's worked hard on that over several meetings, has given tasks to the administrations with respect to what should be included in such. But we're at the stage now where a significant final effort and push, if you would, is necessary to basically craft a draft interlocal agreement that would come for decisions to the two councils later this year. So this was a key check-in for us in advance of the next ad hoc committee meeting. So if there are any questions that you have, and I believe Councilman Greenlee mentioned before we broke that he had some more questions. We have Paul Lewis here who can answer anything on the financials. You have the all 3 of the command staff for the consolidated department are here that can answer your questions, and also would open it up to the 2 ad hoc committee members that are here if there was anything that they wanted to add. But we're hoping for some comments from the council. You can't provide direction per se tonight, but the next steps would be, from the administrative perspective, is moving toward an interlocal agreement and undertaking that effort, and then bringing that back to the ad hoc, joint ad hoc committee.
Council? Paul?
I have a number of questions. When kind of go in reverse order, on page 23, under special delivery assessment, you say that the minimum staffing is 4 FTEs. I'm curious, do you have any idea before consolidation how many qualified volunteers were on site to fill those slots?
I don't believe by contract, I don't believe volunteers were ever allowed to fill the day shift slots unless...
And none of the volunteers, they cannot fill there's minimum staffing of 2.
Right.
Sometimes volunteers would spend the night or the day shift. So at times we would have 2 or 3 or 4. Most likely though would be one individual. So we probably have 2 paid and maybe 1 volunteer. So our minimum would be around 3.
So in the scenario that was discussed, where prior to consolidation, staffing at 3 FTE with 2 FTE minimum, were you allowed to use, you have to have 2 minimum, 2 FTEs minimum. Were you allowed to fill that 3rd slot with a volunteer?
No.
Negative. No.
Well, volunteers cannot take any.
So if there was not, if there were not paid staff available because of injury or Kelly days or whatever to fill that 3rd slot, what did you do?
Yeah, overtime.
overtime and/or mutual aid. If you remember, in 2010, we had a significant number of our staff, 4 and 5 at a particular time, who were out injured and not able to fulfill shifts. And at that time, we actually I reached out to both the City of Camas and to East County Fire and Rescue and initiated a rolling, ongoing mutual aid call for any shifts that we were below the minimum staffing of 2 to borrow some of their personnel to come over and cover our station. We can never use volunteers to fill a staff position.
One of the things that I had heard, I have to admit it was several months ago, was that it had been decided that the volunteers were no longer qualified to drive a second engine or even to sit in the right-hand seat, that they had to sit in the jump seats behind the cabin. Is that still true?
I don't know what they were doing before the merger. I know we can look to Cliff on one particular aspect of that is that, Cliff, you remind me the requirements of ALS engines when it comes to who can staff an ALS engine?
To be an ALS engine with the state, and Dr. Whitworth mentioned there are state responsibilities. You have to staff it with ALS EMS equipment 24/7 and with ALS staff.
Right. So Washougal, before the merger, Washougal is not ALS and was not
Correct.
ALS before. So there was no restriction whatsoever on Washougal staff taking out Washougal volunteers in particular taking out second-out engines or anything. No.
We actually have the reverse
And-
is the case in some cases where we actually have engines that even our paid staff cannot take out because it's got the your medications and your equipment on board that can only be operated by ALS, and even if it's not used, they still can't take that engine out because they're not trained to utilize the equipment itself.
I read after consolidation, the minimum staffing is 4 FTEs. I assume that includes the 2 ALS firefighter, ALS paramedics that are there with the ambulance.
Yes, although it's not, Cliff, do we always have a minimum of 2 medics there? Don't we have some times when there's only 1 medic at the station?
Correct.
So there are times when we only have 1 ALS medic at the station, but there's still 4 total. So it'd be, in those particular instances, it'd be 1 paramedic and 3 EMTs.
So my question is, does the ambulance respond to fire calls?
Yes, it does.
What if it's currently transporting?
Then it cannot respond. It would continue on with their transport to the hospital or wherever it is they're going.
So what happens then?
They would complete whatever their assignment is. For instance, if they're...
No, I meant in terms of responding to the fire call.
Oh, as far as responding to the fire call, then other stations come in to help back up. So Station 171's engine crew would still respond to the fire, and then you'd pull in engines from Camas and wherever else are needed. Keep in mind that all of Clark County is now dispatched as a closest unit for the entire county. So if a Washougal engine is not available, or Washougal ambulance is not available, then other ambulances or other fire trucks come in as needed, and it works the same way for Camas, Vancouver, anywhere else in the county.
Again, my information is several months old, but it was my understanding that the number of volunteers had actually decreased from 30 to 23. Is that still true?
I don't know. We've never had 30 volunteers in the 2 years I've been here. We've always been hovering right about that 25 number, but that goes up and down. I mean, we'll take on several at the beginning of a year, and then we'll have several that'll leave as well. So we've always hovered about that 25 number just in the 2 years I've been here. Now, what happened before 2 years before, or before 2 years, I can't speak to. I don't know, Ron, can you speak to overall numbers before 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was always my goal to have around 30 volunteers, and like Nick was saying, though, that number fluctuates, and right now I think we're at 24. We expect to bring on some new volunteers the first of the year, try to bump that number back up to 30.
Okay, the other questions I have, actually probably more not so much for the chiefs, but do I understand it correctly that we're presently using part of our emergency levy to fund fire services? And what is being proposed, and of course fire services come out of general fund, but what is being proposed is that the entire 46 cent of a new levy would go exclusively to EMS, and that would leave a gap to be filled from the general fund for the fire service.
Not exactly like that, but we are at a 50-cent EMS levy. We are maxed out on our EMS levy. And per our interlocal agreement with Camas, we send 25 cents of that to them, and then we send the equivalent of a dime, which was the 10-cent levy lid lift. That's expired, as you know, but we have a fund balance in that. What the proposal is right now for the consolidation option is there is no prescription on how we pay for the service. We can use any funding source that we would like to pay for the service. So under the consolidation option, the total cost of the entire system is split between the two communities according to that weighted allocation. And it's roughly 67-33. 67% of the total cost would be borne by Camas, and 33% of the total cost would be borne by Washougal, and it would be a bill to us that is roughly the same as what we're paying now.
6337.
Thank you. 6337, not 6733. We would need to use every penny of that EMS, that 50-cent EMS levy, absolutely. We would continue to use every penny of the 50-cent EMS levy to support fire and EMS. We would continue to propose to the council a renewal of the levy lid lift and use that toward that bill, if you would, to replace that which was already there. The delta between the 35 and the 46 is present for all of the alternatives, and that is factored into our long-range forecasting, that 11 cents. So none of the models presents a whole. They all are challenged by exactly the same thing.
And then if you go back to slide 14, consolidation cost allocation recommendation.
Yes. Oh, I did it on mine, not on that one. That's okay, I'm sorry. My apologies. There we go.
It looks like the funding and allocation of costs for Washougal would be $2.6 million, close enough for hand grenades. What's the current budget for fire and EMS for Washougal?
Yeah, I'm going to have Paul answer that one.
Okay.
Thank you. That 2.6 million represents the estimated 2015 net cost to Washougal, and what makes that 2.6 million up is the number here. So that's the 1.8 million net general fund fire, plus your 640,000 from the EMS, and then there's 141,000, which is the additional 11 cents. So it's the combined fire general fund budget and your EMS revenue plus the supplemental 11 cents.
Okay, so I don't want to put Jennifer on the spot here because I'm asking her off the top of her head. Do you know what the fire fund budget is?
For 2013, it was $2.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Other council questions, comments? Okay. Are we good to, Chief?
Schumacher had one other thing he wanted to add, he said.
I just wanted to address the issue with the ambulance responding on calls. I've always, I looked at that, and at that time, we had 2 firefighters 50% at the time. But with the ambulance going on calls, they were only gone out of the station about a quarter of the time. So I much preferred having 4 people 75% of the time than 2 people 50% of the time. So that was the justification.
Do the ad hoc committee members have any comments on the status of the committee work and the next steps?
I had a lot of comments at our meeting, but I didn't take very good notes, and the one I do remember is the discussion of volunteer firefighters, and there was a promise that in the draft interlocal that program would be maintained, but no funding came attached with it, and to me that is an illusory promise if that's the way it turns out.
The volunteers are in our budget.
It's in the
now.
budget.
Camas is actually adding volunteers into their budget for 2014 as well.
Right. The consolidated department would include the current funding for the volunteer program.
And what Mr. Boger's referring to was simply an oversight by me in that we were trying to work in some language into the proposed interlocal that would commit the city of Camas to maintaining a specific level of funding, like a $ amount that they would have to agree to. And then I was told afterwards that that's not actually allowable to tie a council's hands like that, to tie future council's hands like that. However, we are still working on some alternative wording in a proposed ILA that I think would address Mr. Boger's concerns to the extent that you're looking for. So that still promises to maintain the program and yet does so in a way that's not illegal, essentially. So we're still working on that.
One of the other general area of comment I had is if we get down the road 5-10 years and we don't want to go forward with it, it sounds like it's almost as hard to dissolve the Austrian-Hungarian Empire to unravel it. And so how that gets dealt with, I'm a little fuzzy on how we possibly could do that.
Yeah, we have to work on that piece. This is a significant interlocal agreement, and as you can imagine, it would be significant to go in the other direction. And it's one other comment on the volunteer program I think is important to note. All costs of both organizations would be fully pooled, including that, and then 63% of those costs would be borne by Camas and 37% by Washougal. So under that model, 63% of the cost of the current Washougal/Camas volunteer program would be paid for by the city of Camas, and 37% of it would be paid for by the city of Washougal, as would all of the other costs. So it's just an interesting note. That wouldn't stand alone in our budget. It would be in a combined budget, and 63% of it would be paid for by the city of Camas. There are significant issues in the mechanics of an interlocal agreement that have to be worked out, and the ad hoc committee's done a really good job of pointing out what their areas of concern are and areas of attention so that we know to address those. But fundamentally, the bottom line proposition is crafting an interlocal agreement that would put in place the consolidation is the next step. If it's not the next step, then it's to pursue one of the other options. Now, the staff recommendation and the administrative recommendation is to continue on the path that was previously chartered to the ad hoc group. And for us to expend energy now, significant energy, to to take on that task and bring it back to the ad hoc committee meeting.
And also to be clear, I'm fully supportive of proceeding with this. I don't think we can possibly maintain our current levels of service without doing this. It's not saving as much money as I'd hope, but I think down the line it very well could save some significant money. But one question I had, and it wasn't quite as crisply laid out in our meeting at the Camas City Hall a few weeks ago, was the options A and B on the ambulance services. It seems to me that the additional cost of stationing an ambulance here in Washougal is worth it, and I hope that's the line we proceed on.
It would, yeah, under the consolidation model, it is here. It would only be under a separate fire scenario that if we wanted to save, we could not have it here.
Where would it actually be stationed in Camas? How close would it be to us?
The main station, 41?
The main station downtown would be the only alternative.
Chief, you did a time study for Councilmember Lindsay. It was 4 minutes or 4 minutes and some seconds?
Well, and that was just an estimate on how much longer it takes an ambulance to get to some of our primary response areas in Washougal. And yeah, from downtown Camas, it's about an additional 4 minutes. And of course, traffic varies significantly depending on time of day and day of week. But yeah, about 4 minutes.
Excuse me, but I'm on the west side of the city to Sunset Ridge. That's a greater distance to come from downtown Camas.
Yes, certainly could be. Yeah. And then if you're talking, for instance, ambulance coming from Grass Valley, which is our station 42, that's it's going to take another 15 minutes or so. So the times start extending pretty rapidly.
Dave?
I noticed that we're going to raise the levy to 46 cents and provide that to Camas. What is the current levy?
Our current levy is 50 cents, but our payment to Camas is 35 cents.
And it's going to go to 46.
If we do not consolidate and maintain a separate interlocal agreement for EMS, Camas has informed us that their expectation would be, in negotiating the next agreement, that the payment would be 46 cents.
Okay, so we're maxed out on the levy as it is. So there's no way to recover that, but there's no reason to recover it because Camas is going to provide the service.
Well, we need to replace the levy lid lift to maintain the current levels of service, whether we're consolidated or not. And then, yes, there is an 11-cent gap in all of these models. And that's a cost driver in this program that is necessary to maintain the current level of service.
And does that include the contribution that Washougal will have to make for a sinking fund for new vehicles?
Vehicle replacement's included in the modeling. Yep.
Okay.
And that's something that I don't think has been as much in the past. There's also some fire impact fee contribution to that as well.
I see a trend in fire services around the country to think in terms of sinking funds to replace vehicles, and I encourage that.
Yeah. It's a big sinking fund.
$400,000 is a big chunk to pay at once.
Right.
Well, a couple of years ago, we utilized our fire impact fees to pay for that engine, the new engine, all at once rather than bond it.
I think that was great. Good move.
Other questions, comments?
The existing levy, I have it in my head that that's actually two pieces. Is that correct?
25 cents and 25 cents.
That one of them expires sooner than the other?
The 50-cent levy is one levy, but we use the funds in two ways. But they're both used. We use it for our own BLS, basic, like I think it's B is for basic.
Yes.
We use half of it for our own IV techs on our own rigs, and the other half pays for the ALS and transport, along with the dime from the levy lid lift. So we have the EMS levy, which we're maxed out on at 50 cents, and it's on a 6-year cycle, and it was last approved in 10 and started in 11. It ends in 16. And then there was the dime, which was on its own 6-year cycle, and it expired at the end of 12. And this is the first year that we haven't been collecting any. It expired at 12, in the end of 12, right? Right. But we had those supplanting dollars, as you'll recall, and we've been able to use those, and we will run out of those halfway through next year. That gets us to the 35 cents. So that's the staggering that you're thinking of, Councilman. It would be great, sort of, to have them on the same cycle, but then you'd have two measures running together. Because of, if you recall some of the context from our last meeting, our AV numbers and what can be generated from a penny of tax on $1,000 of assessed valuation in our community compared to other communities kind of speaks to why we've been needing 60 cents, 50 cents in an EMS levy and 10 cents in a levy lid lift to generate the kinds of revenues to support this type of program that 46 cents, 35 cents does in other communities.
Just on that topic, I think it's interesting to note that, for instance, up in Clark County Fire District 6, which is Hazeldale in general, they collect 46 cents EMS levy, and they don't even transport. So even for a non-transporting agency, collecting 46 cents, I think that shows where it was one of the deciding factors in why Camas decided to push forward to bump up to 46. When we realized that even non-transporting agencies were higher than we were, we realized that we were not funding the program at nearly what it needed to be.
And please feel free, I know it's a lot of information this evening in multiple categories. If you think of other questions or follow-ups to what we've been talking about, just please shoot an email, and we can send it to Paul if he's the one to answer it, or we'll get those answers, or give a call. We can sit down and talk through any of the parts and pieces of this.
I just wanted to say that from my point of view, there's a problem with that, in that if I send you an email, then I get an answer. But if we get an answer in chambers here, then we can discuss it among ourselves. And there's great value to that.
Sure. I could copy everybody, and then we could bring it up again here. I appreciate that.
Any other comments from council? Are we fine moving ahead with starting to prepare an interlocal agreement?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we are going to move towards our discussion items on department budgets.
I'll hold my name tag. I don't know who I am. There you go. So as we started last week, we brought forward the budget guide that had the different explanations of the budget funds and the expense line items. Jeanette went over her 2013 budget to kind of help explain what she spends her money on in her department and what the different line items are and how much of it's for salary and benefits and some of those items that we're required to provide regardless of revenue coming in. And so tonight we're going to continue that with the other departments. Fire's going to start, and so they'll go through their 2013 budget, pretty high level, giving you an overview of the salary amount, the benefit amount, what the benefit amount entails, and then get down to that non-obligatory number, which is pretty small in comparison to the department budgets as a whole, and talk about what those items are made up of. And then if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask. And then they will discuss any 2014 highlights that may be coming forward in their budget requests. This isn't going to be an in-depth discussion of the 2014 budget. We are still working on putting that together. We just wanted to give you context of the 2013 budget so that preparation of the 14 would be smooth, and hopefully everybody would have more background information and understand better. Oops, sorry. Understand better where the numbers are coming from and what they're made up of. With that, I'll turn it over to the chief.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. What I have here is the overall budget for 2013. As you can see, it's $2.543 million. Salaries is $1 million. Benefits are $400,000. And these are the obligatory costs here. Is there any questions on what you see there?
Question, go ahead, Paul.
How many left ones do we have?
We started out in 13 with 2, and then Booj passed away back in May, I believe, and so now we have just Chief Darrell Alder. He's the only left employee we have.
Thank you.
In fire, I believe there's 1 or 2 in police.
On the hydrant cost, so is that number?
The hydrant costs were figured in for 2013, but that, through a court decision, I believe in July, that ended. So that was like $252,000 originally, and so that'll be out, $256 I see, and so that'll be out of next year's budget.
But for 2013, are we saving dollars to this budget and picking them up in utilities after that?
Yes, half. I think basically you can figure half of that will be for 2013 will be excluded from the budget.
The court ruling was official on July 28th, so we'll just divide that amount by 12 and then times it by 7 months.
An item of note, the volunteer program, you'll see $39,000. That includes the point system, around $35,000, and then $4,000 is for uniforms. And so that's in the budget for this year. Utilities at $22,000. That was for both stations, Station 172 and 171. So you'll see a decrease in next year's budget for utilities because we no longer are operating Station 172. It'll be a single station. The non-obligatory funds is $180,000, and that is less than 10% of the overall budget.
That's just a visual that didn't turn out well as we converted it from
Yeah.
PowerPoint to Keynote, but it should come out better in your iPads and the printouts that are available. That's just the overall budget and how it looks graphically, with the salaries and benefits being the blue, the kind of color blue that is, but the non-obligatory will be on the next slide.
Yeah, the non-obligatory in this screen here is the light green, so you can see how small a piece of pie that is. With the non-obligatory budget of the $180,000, we $89,000 for supplies, small tools, and our bunker gear. Professional services of $41,000. It might be a little bit high compared to other departments, but at the fire department, we take care of the building on the inside and as well as the outside, so you'll see building repairs in that fund.
Jennifer, why do we put communications on this one? I'm assuming those are phones, are air cards, all that type of stuff. Why do we have those underneath non-obligatory? I would think those would be fairly necessary.
It's not the Crescent communication radios, it's
Right.
more of the station phones. We were just trying to delve it out in the way it seemed reasonable. Could we do without cell phones? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, this costs here aren't related to Crescent.
No, I saw that.
Yeah.
We tried to be pragmatic in how we looked at it, and so we probably an oversight. It could be either above the line or below the line. But we were trying to be conservative.
Okay.
Just another pie chart there of the non-obligatory budget for 13. And for 2014, our highlights are we budgeted $120,000 for overtime. So far this year, we're through August 31st, which is 2/3 of the year, at 67% of the budget. We've only spent about 30% so far. We did put $120,000, not knowing if it was going to be a consolidated department or not. So if it is a consolidated department, perhaps looking at an overtime budget around $75,000. But we are going to be putting $120,000 into the budget. So if there's questions with regards to that. We're pretty much, with the 2014 budget, we're just maintaining the current level of service. We aren't anticipating any major capital purchases for the years. We're just going about just keeping the same level of service that we currently have. Are there any questions? It's just been a brief overview, and like Jennifer was saying, we'll be back in 2 weeks.
The high level will be on, I believe, the 23rd of September, and then the Mambo budget, that we like to call it, is the end of October.
Any additional questions for Chief Schumacher? Chiefs, thank you.
Yeah.
Mitch?
Thank you, Mayor Council. Here is, for community development, our overall budget's $697,000 plus salaries for the 6 of us, $462 with the benefits at $173. Again, like fire, we have insurance and communications and non-obligatory funds associated with this budget.
Okay, as you can see, we weren't consistent with communication.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's communications on this side for. Although I'm not sure if that's taken into account the communications that is our publications and notice for
that was your advertising.
advertising. Okay. So there again, pie chart, and I'm not sure that you can see the pie shape. The 45 there at the top was the non-obligatory portion of it. Looking at it for 2013, the office supplies $9,500, professional services $10,500. That's legal services. I've had a couple of DAs, development agreements requiring legal service and outside review, and advertising. Advertising is a high cost for us. The notice that I put in the paper for code amendments is $180 every time that we go to change that, and so actually the advertising now for our annex, for plan amendments coming up is in the neighborhood of over $350 twice that we have to pay for that. So those kind of things keep adding up. Travel and training for the everybody within the departments, $7,500. Other dues, subscriptions, memberships, again, belong to American Planning Association and Washington Association of Planners. This also includes our building official and their certifications and memberships, and also includes our subscriptions for data, GIS data, for us to implement and look at the land use records. And then hearing examiner is $4,500, although I haven't had to use the hearing examiner yet this year, but that is changing next month.
Where's our hearing examiner?
Joe Turner.
You had one earlier this year.
That was last year.
Is it really?
Yes, it was. I know.
Never mind.
And then, so I have, okay, yeah, then this is the pie chart showing the non-obligatory funds breakdown there. The highlight, again, within the existing budget, I've increased my professional services for a couple of reasons. I have the Shoreline Master Program that I hope to have approved here shortly. That requires me to do a no net loss analysis as part of that. I'm going to have someone else do that. I am anticipating additional development agreement, like I mentioned earlier this evening, with the port. So I'll have more associated with that. Also, the Downtown Future Roadmap. I spoke about that the last time I was here as part of my department update. Engaging the downtown, the businesses and the community, the residents in the downtown area about how we're going to move the vision that we have downtown and move that to the east. So, yeah, and that's all. That shift of increasing my professional services is all within existing budget. Where I made cuts other places to not allow that increase, I'm still within the existing budget.
How many employee? How much staff? How many salaries?
6 of us.
6.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mitch, on your professional services line item, the $10,500, do we charge any of that back to applicants and/or developers?
Nope.
Okay.
That's out of the engineering fund, which will be discussed during the public works discussion.
Question?
Thanks, Mitch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
All right, for the finance department, I went ahead and, even though we didn't budget for IT within the finance budget in 13, we had it budgeted in a different department. I went ahead and pulled the mid-year numbers through the end of the year and incorporated it as if it had been budgeted that way. So if you try to tie these finance numbers back to the finance department budget, they're not going to tie directly for 2013, but I thought it would be a good perspective since we have added our 2 wonderful IT staff to the city. So the $790,000 overall budget includes the partial year costs of the 2 IT staff. So salaries for the 8 of us would be the $500,000 with benefits of $246,000. Our portion of the overall city insurance, and then the remainder of our fund. So again, the big piece of the pie. In our non-obligatory budget, we have approximately $20,000 for professional services where any legal costs that we incur would go there, or the financial services agreements with Paul Lewis usually. We have a couple smaller agreements that we utilize through there as well. Our travel and training budget, our supply budget, and then our miscellaneous costs for the bank and some of those things are wrapped up in the other. Questions? Pretty easy.
Where's the IT capital?
That's in Fund 521, the capital budget, and we aren't going to talk about the capital budgets tonight, but they will be part of the later discussions. So our intent for 14 will to have the finance IT fund, this one to be the O&M. Some of the smaller purchases, printers and those types of things will probably come out of here because those are pretty cheap these days, but the larger server purchases, software licenses and those types of things will come out of the capital budget.
Great, thank you.
So that was kind of my thunder for highlights for Paul's question. And we are going to have the full inclusion of the IT operation costs into the finance department for 14. So you will see the finance department will be increased between 13 and 14, but that's the inclusion of IT, and the general services budget will decrease to incorporate those costs to make it net neutral. Questions?
Questions for Jen? We'll move it right along.
All right, I turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Jen. Before I jump into looking at the council's operating budget and then the city administration operating budget, just a general comment. One of the things that we were hoping to be able to point out as part of this series of presentations, which is being given in the 13 context to set a foundation for moving forward for 14 in the future meetings that we'll have, is to show that for our departments in the general fund, with some exception in Public Works, which we'll talk about when we bring those back, and we've used the term non-obligatory. The non-obligatory amount of the budget is a very, very small percentage of the overall budget in those departments. The fire department budget of $2.5 million, we call it above the line, the salaries and the benefits and some of the CRESA payments and things that are really fixed, short of a conversation about a change in level of service and an accompanying change in staffing levels, short of a conversation like that, all else equal, $180,000 out of a $2.5 million budget in fire is what we would call non-obligatory professional services, communications, and different things. And even in that bucket of money, even in that 180, you might say, well, some of that stuff really you have to do with, you have to repair your building and you have to do those things. So kind of the bottom or the punchline out of all of that is, as we look at efficiencies and streamlining, it is those areas, those non-obligatory areas where we have to go, short of a conversation about reducing services or changing the level of service. An analogy that I sometimes use for myself, and I'm not an expert on this piece, but I understand at the federal level, you'll hear conversations about the discretionary budget at the federal level, and I've seen different illustrations and graphics of that, and they'll have this huge stack of pennies that fills a whole room, and that's entitlements and other fixed parts of the budget, and then they'll have their discretionary piece, which includes defense, and it'll be a small little stack compared to this other huge stack. And the point is, where the domain where we can operate as we continue to try to be efficient and effective is in these non-obligatory areas. And that's really the only place where the department heads can move things around and try to be creative in balancing their budgets. So with that, I'll move into your budget and then to the administration budget. So for the council, you can see your budget's about $95,000. About half of that, not quite half of that, is for the modest salaries that the council receives, and then you can see that election cost. Now, certainly in 13, because it's an election year for us, it's an odd-numbered year. That number's where it's at. In 14, it might be a little bit less, depending on what we do. Though, if we run any measures in 14, there'll be costs for that. Very small piece of our overall insurance is attributable to the council, and then your non-obligatory funds, almost $15,000. And you can see the light blue there represents that portion graphically. You have a $7,000 travel and training budget. It's basically $1,000 per council member. We have some communicating we have to do with our official postings, and then just the basic office supplies necessary to support the council. And that's the council's budget in 13. Moving, another graphic that shows how that plays out. For the administration, you can see our overall budget is almost $350,000. You can see the salary item there. The mayor is included in this budget, as well as 2 staff members in administration. Our portion of the insurance and then our non-obligatory funds are just under $50,000. There's the graphic representation of that. The detail for our non-obligatory funds, as you know, in 2013, the council appropriated $20,000 into the administration budget for strategic planning implementation. We have not expended the full 20, and we may not. We use some of that for services from Portland State so far this year. There's an appropriation for professional services, and this year we used it for the help that we've been receiving for the fire consolidation. As you recall, we are in the initial stages of our tourism promotion project. And in fact, I can report that just late last week, the proposal that we were preparing using these funds, we prepared a proposal for the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee regarding how to expend the broad appropriation that the council made. Councilwoman Plinsky was there. The committee approved that proposal, and so there will be, using lodging tax dollars, there will be a tourism promotion project, and we'll get information out in more detail to you once we finalize that, how that project will roll out. And then another project that we've been working on this year, and will continue, we talked about as part of our cost of service discussion, is for all of our infrastructure, our capital facilities advocacy, looking for funds from grants and from the state legislature and all of those different sources. We are working a project there to better position ourselves for the next session and to do everything we can to try to mitigate the large costs of our capital programs and get help from others. The travel and training, office supplies, and the other types of expenses that are the same as in the other departments makes up the rest of that. And that's the graphic for that. And in terms of highlights moving forward, we'll continue that advocacy for grant resources. We want to be very bullish on that in 2014. And we will continue to implement the strategic plan with that modest appropriation for strategic planning initiatives based on guidance and feedback from the council on how we should do that. And that is the administration and council budgets. So,
Questions for David? Okay, so we will go ahead and schedule the police and public works departments to go through theirs at our next meeting.
Right.
Workshop.
I'll send a communication out to the email that builds on one I previously sent, but just verbally, very quickly, the next piece is on the budget. At your next meeting on the 23rd, that's bumping up against a deadline that the state has set for us, and so Jennifer will be presenting the non-detailed but the high-level revenue estimates. These are always estimates, revenue estimates, and the high-level expense estimates at that meeting. The second quarter update as well, and then we will have Chief Mitchell and also have Trevor here to do what we just did for theirs. And Trevor's is on the general fund components of Public Works. We were thinking of having him provide some of the background information at the utility rate town hall on the utility side of that to inform interested folks about utility rates, because of the utility side, those costs are what go into the rates and they're not part of our general tax dollars. And then following that, we have presentation of the detailed budget estimates on the 28th, and then we've scheduled several workshops after that on the budget, and the budget town hall is on November 9th per your rules, right on the heels of that. So I'll send a communication out that lays out that whole budget calendar, what you can expect as we continue to move forward on that. And Jen mentioned that we weren't putting the capital budget in what we did tonight. The main focus of tonight was to demonstrate the kind of the fixed part of the budget, and then that non-obligatory part and where that works, and just as a context for you.
Thank you. Okay, with that brings us to the second opportunity in the agenda for any members of the public that are left that would like to address council. I'm moving right along. Mayor's report, I've got just two items for you. One is a reminder of the 9/11 ceremony this Wednesday, 8 o'clock in the morning outside Washougal Fire Station. And then the second one is the upcoming Heritage Days for the museum, September 14th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the, at the museum and the streets outside of it as well. In addition to that, tomorrow is the fourth meeting of the CTRAN composition meeting, board composition, which is at 4 o'clock at the main public library in Vancouver. Don't know how long that meeting's actually going to last. I think it sounds like we may have some discussions on actually postponing any additional work on that until some attorneys get some things sorted out among themselves. So we'll see where that one even goes. Items from council members. Brent?
Nothing.
Karen?
Nada.
Paul?
I just wanted to mention that Jennifer, Councilman McDaniel, and I both attended the opening football game and saw the field. And yes, it is wonderful. Also on 9/11 in the morning, actually beginning at 7:30, is the Evergreen Habitat for Humanity Raising the Roof breakfast, which I am now committed to go to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have a community service day, the 14th of this month. People who are interested can meet in the north parking lot at Washougal High School by 8:30. And I will be there, God willing, and the creeks don't rise. I also wanted to find out what happened. Last meeting, I mentioned a resolution that I wanted to have discussions of in the next workshop, and that did not happen. Where are we at on that?
Resolution on?
It was on the procurement threshold?
Yes.
Yeah, the council requested 3 workshops, and so we've got those scheduled in. Looking at our calendar here. Councilman Boger requested one on communications, and we have that on October. I have that penciled in for October 14.
You can actually defer. You can actually defer that one until after the election, pending the outcome of Proposition 1, because that might have an impact on it. So just take that one off until after November.
We can move. I will do that. And then on the 28th, I had the change in form of government transition. That was requested. I had that penciled in for October 28th, and then I had the one that you're referring to, Councilman, on the 12th, but based on what I just heard, and I didn't do those in any particular order, we can do that on the 14th. October 14th for the procurement resolutions. Next meeting, we have FCS is here for the cost of service session number 3, and Councilwoman Smith from Camas is here for her quarterly RTC update. We have her for 10 or 15 minutes, and then the rest of the workshop time for FCS. And then in the council meeting, we have the Parker's Landing hearing, and then the financial presentations that we were talking about. So, and then with what we had tonight, we had these things starting on the 14th. So, does that work for the council? That's
well,
that's what I had penciled in.
In the transition to form of government, is something that I'd like to hear a report on really as soon as possible. And I don't know what the rest of the council would think about
Second.
I agree.
I can move that to the 14th.
The repeal of that resolution should take only a few minutes of discussion. It really shouldn't take long at all.
So combine the two?
I'm sorry?
Combine the two?
Sure.
So are you looking for a workshop item or a council?
Well, it needs to be a workshop item before it can come onto council agenda, is my understanding.
That's typically our practice. But, I mean, the council can bring resolutions
Okay.
meeting as you've done. We prefer to do a workshop and then receive direction on preparing something for the next meeting. I could, at the 14th, during the council meeting, we could discuss both the transition and, well, no, and the resolution, and then for the next meeting, if you want a resolution, we would bring that. Or do you want sooner?
Can I have some clarification on the discussion items? Are you bringing them forth on the 23rd for the workshop and potential passage on the 14th for the resolution, or I'm confused?
Up to this point, I don't believe we believe that there was anything other than workshop items.
Right.
Oh.
Right, so I'm being informed now, I believe, that there's potential action on a resolution. So if that's the case, or, you know, that someone will be moving that, then I can bring a workshop.
I mean, I'm comfortable discussing it at a workshop and entertaining a motion following thereafter at a council meeting, since it's an item that's already been covered and it's currently.
Refresh, Councilmember Greenlee, could you refresh my recollection on exactly what this would do?
This would repeal my ability to sign contracts on your behalf and
Up to
professional
a-
services agreements up to 40,000 that are in the budget, that type of thing. I think if you're wanting to go that direction, and you certainly can, then we need to bring forth also the discussion about going back to weekly meetings. I think we determined early on that if you all choose to go back to that, and that's fine. Paul, the reason that, Brent, the reason that resolution was put in a couple of years ago, we had a separation agreement with a
All right.
staff member.
I've heard of that story.
That council didn't really want to be involved in, so they put the resolution in to authorize the mayor to go ahead and sign those things that are okay in there.
Sure.
And go forward with there from. And we've been doing that ever since. I think we've determined that that's probably part of the reason that 70% of your agenda that used to be on your agenda is no longer there.
Mr. Mayor, I have to stop you there because you are now discussing things that were discussed in executive session in a full, open council meeting, so I don't really think that's
Well,
appropriate.
I'm just,
Totally appropriate.
No, it isn't.
I just want to know how complicated the issue is to deal with before we schedule this.
And I would observe that most of those small contracts were consent agenda items in the past.
If we repeal that resolution, it would just simply mean that all contracts and agreements for everything, except for minor, purchasing of supplies and things like that that aren't contracts, would come to council. They could be on consent.
With all due respect, the resolution in question raised the limit from 10,000 to 40,000. And if that resolution were repealed, my understanding is it would revert to status quo ante.
With all due respect, the limit was 0.
No, we had a policy, I believe it was,
Then you have a policy that none of the staff or the administration knew anything about.
Well, I don't know how big of a deal, what you could just strike out 40,000 and put 10,000 or 20,000
right,
or
it's a simple amendment. It's a
$39.95.
simple amendment that can
Yeah.
be taken care of in a matter of moments.
Sounds good to me.
So it
So if
doesn't
you
ma- I
all
don't-
that have discussed this one, if you could let staff know what it is you're looking for, we can certainly bring that forward.
Well, I haven't decided.
Do you want me to just prepare an agenda bill and a resolution to amend the existing resolution, and then I'll leave the number blank, and then in your deliberations and in your motion, you can decide on a number, and I can bring that. We don't even need to workshop it. I can have that be on the next meeting's agenda. Because I think we kind of almost had a de facto workshop for that right now, so. I mean, I didn't know that this was where the council was going to be headed on that. I was preparing to do a workshop on, why we did that and the comparables that we looked at and all of that. So I appreciate the clarification.
And then I just wanted to mention that from the most recent RTC meeting, nothing is simple at RTC because RTC sits between the local jurisdictions and the state of Washington and the federal government, all of whom have competing and sometimes conflicting rules and schedules. So sometimes the vocabulary gets a little tortured. There is a list of priorities for projects. When you hear that, you would think that that's actually what it means, but that's not what it means. In order for a project to be eligible for funding from either Washington State or the federal government through Washington State, the project must be on the priority list. But it's not really a priority. You can't fund a project unless it's on the list. On the other hand, what funding you get may or may not respect those priorities. That said, Washougal has a project on the list, which is the improvements at 32nd and Evergreen. And it's a substantial grant if we get it. The big question is whether there will actually be funding available. It's not clear that there will be. But we do have a project on the list, and it ranks fairly high on the priority list. Then the other thing that I want to mention is, I'll read the first paragraph here. Dear Association of Washington Cities Employee Benefit Trust member, approximately half of our city staff receive their medical insurance through the AWC Employee Benefits Trust. On July 25th, after months of research and consideration, I can attest to that personally, the AWC Employee Benefit Trust Board of Trustees voted to move from a fully insured benefit program to a self-insured model. Among a variety of advantages and opportunities that goes along with self-funding, our projection is of a 0% increase for those covered by the Trust's Regents Assurance Medical, Group Health Medical, Willamette Dental System Dental, and VSP Vision self-insured plans for 2014. By way of context, the annual increases in Regents Assurance have run between 10 and 14% for the past 4 or 5 years. So this is a big deal because, and the reason I know all this is because I sit on that board. We have found a way, we think, to actually bend the curve on the cost of medical insurance for our city and all of the other cities who use the Employee Benefits Trust. Large cities like Vancouver are typically self-insured themselves. But for small and medium-sized cities, even transit districts up to several hundred employees, the Employee Benefits Trust provides medical insurance, and so this is a big deal. We've been working on this now for a couple of years.
Is there some coverage for like catastrophic, if you happen to get hit with a lot of catastrophic illnesses in the pool?
Yes.
So
I mean, the short answer is yes, we have excess liability limits.
Okay.
It's more complicated than that. You don't call it that, but yes. And with that, I'm done.
Joyce?
Nope.
Jennifer?
Yes, I would like to hear some more from you, Mr. Mayor, about what's happening at CTRAN with the committee discussions, and, well, there was a urgent request for direction last time we were in session, so is there something that's happened since, or
Well, there's no urgent request for
direction from the
direction at
council?
all.
Well, no, from the last time we met, we had to discuss something rather quickly, and we were sent an email, and we had to
Only-
make a decision,
Hang
pick
on.
A, B, or C.
Brent, let's go ahead and have you leave the room if we want to.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Oh.
No, there was no urgent need for a decision from council. It's if council wanted to take a vote on where you wanted me to vote on your behalf for the meeting that comes up tomorrow.
Okay, are the choices still the same as
Yes.
far as the division of individual seats, et cetera, for the cities, so on and so forth? Because I look at the
Yes.
list. Oh, okay. Great, good to know. Then I guess our direction would stand. I heard that there were potential changes, as you had mentioned. Maybe that Ridgefield didn't want a seat, or there was going to be more discussion about that, or something.
Ridgefield does not want a seat. We had that discussion at the last meeting. I've
Was
not
it-
heard of any new proposals, no.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be combative, I just want to know, because I'm hearing other things. What about La Center? Anything? Yakult?
The Center, Yakult, and Ridgefield want to be one seat. They've not changed that I'm aware of. We've not received, matter of fact, I've got the updates on my desk from C-Tran that were hand-delivered that for tomorrow's meeting, everything is still in play the way that it was. The questions that have come up since the last meeting, there are 3 different attorneys' opinions, one from C-Tran's attorney, one from the county attorney, and one from the city attorney of Vancouver, on whether the block veto goes away, does it stay, what shape is it in, given whatever makeup might be, or
That's
any of
essential.
that, so.
That's very important to know. So we do not have a definitive answer on the block veto, whether if we keep the Vancouver council seats at 3, the block veto would stay or go. We do not have a definitive legal
Nobody does.
answer on that. Interesting.
That's the reason that I say tomorrow's meeting may get postponed off to discussions at another time.
I'd have to say that we would definitely, I personally would not support Vancouver having 3 seats if the block veto power, remained. And I think that we pretty much gave you.
I believe your direction at the last meeting was that you wanted the block veto to go away. I believe the only community out of the number of communities that are sitting on that want the block veto to stay is the city of Vancouver.
Okay. It's good to know.
So unless your position has changed, I believe you gave clear direction on where you wanted that to go to.
Yeah,
At whatever time an actual vote starts taking place.
absolutely.
I would imagine if we've got 3 different attorneys' opinions that are all in conflict to all 3 of themselves, I doubt anything's going to happen tomorrow, since I would say with the exception of maybe 2 of those that said they could care less about a veto or no veto, that most everybody is very concerned about a veto and if it stays or not in regard to how they potentially will vote on that issue.
Do you feel, as our representative, that if it came down to you being the deciding vote, that you feel confident being able to take our vision forward as far as our city is concerned and our interests?
Of course.
Okay.
Why would I not?
If you need some assistance from council, we can
I-
certainly pass a resolution or do whatever it is you need us to do to stand behind our decision.
I think that's up to you all. Again, I believe at your last meeting, you gave very clear direction for where you wanted those to go.
Yes, but
I
if you
certainly
feel
do
comfortable
not need
walking
assistance.
into no, I'm not saying you do in any, sense that you wouldn't be able to, make a decision. I'm just saying that if you would like us to give you something in writing, we could do that.
I'm not even sure where the discussion's coming from. Certainly from your last meeting, it was in the Post-Record and the Columbian. I think everybody in the county that is interested in knowing what it is has kind of seen where different communities have taken their votes, including yours. So I don't think there's much question, even of those 10 members on that board, of where Washougal has already said they want their vote to be placed, so.
We have the minutes from the last meeting that articulate the council's direction.
Great.
There were two. There was the preferred and the
Right.
it would be okay, I guess.
Yeah.
And now there's some doubt whether the it would be okay, I guess option really would be okay, because if it has 3 and there's still a
Right.
block veto,
Mhm.
but I think the mayor's saying that he would take that as inconsistent with the direction of the council, and so if it was 3 and ambiguous or 3 and the block veto stays, that would be a no.
Okay.
But it seems like it would be nice to have clear direction about what that means. You have 3 legal opinions. I suppose C-Tran takes the advice of their own attorney.
Yeah, I
But-
would imagine that everybody's going to step back. I don't think there's any rush to finish these discussions, and everybody wants to do it right and get it right the first time. So at some point, if they've got to kick it on to, I don't know, the state attorney generals to make some sort of a decision on that of where they believe it. I don't know how 3 attorneys are going to go through and do that, so I think we're all spectators until they come back and say, here's what we believe to be true. Otherwise, I think you're going to see potentially lawsuits from the city of Vancouver and/or the county.
Mm.
So I don't think we want to go running into that quagmire. So, anything else?
I do not. I will defer to other council members to discuss it.
Dave?
I am done.
I think the discussion arose out of a memo that was written by Chris Horn, Chief Civil Deputy for the county, in which he analyzed the opinion of Mr. Wolfendahl, who is the C-Tran counsel. Mr. Wolfendahl believes that that even if you take away the 3 votes, the veto power still remains.
No, Mr. Wolfendahl's opinion and instructions at the last meeting were unless the number of seats held by the city of Vancouver and Clark County remain the same, the veto powers go away of both.
Okay.
So if the county goes down to 2, the veto power goes away. If the county stays at 3 and the city goes down to 2, the veto power goes away. It's only if the composition stays status quo that the veto power remains in effect. And the veto power is actually by the C-Tran bylaws, which is what kind of gums this up anyway.
Section 4.5.1 of the bylaws,
Yep.
which provides that 3 negative votes by the representatives of the city of Vancouver or by the representatives of Clark County on any action to be taken by the governing board shall constitute a veto of the action. So as long as they have 3 seats, they have the veto by the bylaws. And as I understand our direction to you, it was get rid of the 3 seats at the county and the Vancouver level. That eliminates the veto, and by the way, that is the only way to eliminate the veto.
Well, and again, that's up to, again, there are 3 different attorneys that have 3 different opinions.
Well, I think it's pretty clear from the bylaws that that's the only way to eliminate the veto. And what I'm concerned about is that if the C-Tran Council gets up tomorrow and tries to persuade the group that you can leave 3 seats with Vancouver and the county and still remove the veto power, I don't believe that's the case. I think he's been smoking something. And I want to make sure that you don't fall for that. So as I understand the charge from last week, option 3 was 2 seats for Vancouver, 2 seats for Clark County, and Washougal gets its own seat. The rest of it is immaterial to me.
Gotcha.
So I wanted just to confirm with you that you'll support a seat for us and a separate seat for Camas.
Have already along the way.
Okay.
And no matter which of those passes, with, you know, the conversation of who has whatever seats off to the sidelines, we end up with a seat on our own no matter what, except the status quo.
This is good. That's number 1. The second thing is to support reducing the membership of the City of Vancouver and Clark County to no more than 2 members each, for 2 reasons. One, they've been very supportive of projects which I don't think there's a lot of support for here in Washougal. And they're very adamant about it. And it's, in my mind, it's not just that they don't make sense for Washougal, it's just that they don't make sense. The other thing is, I want to make sure that you support the elimination of any veto authority by any member of CTRAN.
Yeah, we've said that along the way.
Okay. We're good. Thank you.
You bet.
Appreciate your support. We'll stand behind you.
I forgot an important piece of what I was saying about the Employee Benefits Trust. In order to participate, we must enter into an interlocal agreement with the trust on or before the 15th of November. I have 3 copies of the packets for staff that include an example interlocal and resolution and some fact sheets and things like that. Then the only other thing I wanted to do was get some description of what's in mind for the town hall, the scheduling of that.
David, I think you sent that out.
No, we just sent out a notice, but sort of the details of how we might do the agenda. So the first part is the volunteer opportunities. So we will go through a brief staff presentation to those community members that come and to the council about what the various volunteer opportunities are at the city, our boards and commissions, and other groups like that. Very briefly describe what those are, invite a leader from that group to share with the community about the important work that those groups do and encourage participation, and then question and answer type session like we do at the town hall meetings if the council has questions for those groups, or if community members have questions for the council or for those that person about that group, to flesh out those opportunities. Any of those groups that are there, we'd like them just to stand to be recognized very briefly and acknowledge their service to the community, their important service to the community. Get through that, all through that, and hopefully it will, as I think was your desire in scheduling that, generate some interest in the community for being part of our volunteer corps. Have a brief break until we go to the next topic, and a chance for any members of the community to talk to you and to talk to those members of those groups, and then reconvene, and then we'll get to the utility, the portion of the program on the utility rates. And as we do on most of these, give a brief staff presentation to set the context for the community members that are there, and then open it up for the community, as on the volunteer question, for the community to engage the council on the utility rate so that you can hear from them.
Can we set a time frame so that the volunteer recognition doesn't go on and on and on? Because that could get lengthy and cut into the utility rates, which I think is extremely important part of this.
Yes, I mean, the intent is for that not to even take half of the meeting, to take less than half of the meeting was the intent, but we could, we'll make sure.
Because the meeting will be, what, 2 hours long, the town hall?
It's 9 to 12?
90, so...
3 hours.
3 hours.
3 hours long, so that's a long, I mean, 30 minutes or so for that, would that be possible?
We might be able to do that. I can't remember exactly how many of those different opportunities there are. We have, I think
I don't want people to burn out and not stay and talk about the utility part, because I think that's such a critical thing. I've been doorbelling person after person, they bring up the utility bills. So it's an important element out there in our community, and I'd like us to have plenty of time to talk about that.
Yeah. I'll make sure.
Thank you.
Dave?
What was the date for that thing again?
The 28th, Saturday, the 28th.
Of September?
Correct.
Got it, okay.
Right, council scheduled that, I think, a couple
Not
of
in the
meetings
small
ago.
print, okay.
Don't come here, though. It's at the high school.
Got it.
What if we did the volunteer part last? So if the utility part was first and the volunteer was last, and then if it went on, there would be time.
That's a possibility, too. The only, the only caveat to that, I do know that the volunteer firefighters have,
The open house for the at the CAM station.
at 10?
At the CAM
Starts at 10, and so they want them there around 9:30. So I know we had talked about putting them first for the volunteers at 9, so they can make it to the open house.
We could do just that. It wouldn't take, we don't have, it doesn't need to take a half an hour, but we were hoping that a spokesperson from the volunteers would come and address the community that's there about that opportunity to volunteer.
I think it's important to recognize them. I'm not, that's not an issue. I just want to make sure that it just doesn't bleed on into the fact that then we don't have time to talk about the utilities.
Right.
We're running out of time on that, too.
Dave?
Would you clarify for me, what was the original intent of the town hall meetings?
It's for the community to engage the council. And this isn't a volunteer recognition event. It's volunteer opportunities, I think is what the council directed us. It was volunteer opportunities and then the utility study were the two topics. We had suggested the volunteer opportunities one, and then council members talked about wanting to do the utilities, and then I think there was more conversation, and the council said, let's do both volunteer opportunities. We thought that as part of explaining the volunteer opportunities, that any volunteers that came to be part of that conversation could just be very briefly recognized. So I don't want to give the impression that we're doing a recognition event. It's not a recognition event, but there'd be just a tacit recognition since they're here. Thank you for your service if you're here.
My concern is that I thought this event was designed to, or this forum was designed to give the public a chance to talk with us, to solicit their ideas on things rather than to communicate our ideas.
Correct, yes. And so hopefully they'll do that about the volunteer opportunities.
And utility rates.
And utility rates, right, which I know is key. So we have put out the notice pursuant to the council's direction that we talk about volunteer opportunities. That was the council's action to do both of those topics, so that that's what we've done. Getting some more specificity about just how you would like that to be choreographed. So we will make sure that we do not truncate the topic of the utility rates, and that we provide a lot of opportunity for that.
I'm not sure how my colleagues feel, but in the future, I'd rather confine these opportunities to more of a one-way conversation from the public. You talk, we listen.
I would say that I think it's useful for the public to have some context. If you just ask people what they think about utility rates, they're going to have a singular answer. On the other hand, I think it's a bit more complicated than that, and that we need to be able to convey a realistic choice. Something beyond rates are too damn high.
Isn't that why we have council meetings, though? I'm
Well, but-
confused about why we're using this particular vehicle to put out information. I thought the goal of it was to elicit information from the public. Brent, this was your brainchild. Wasn't that your goal?
Don't blame me. I
Oh, yes.
I'm not
this
blaming
was
you.
your idea.
Yeah, it's mostly to have the public talk to us and less us talking to the public, but there will be some two-way part of that too, because, you know, they're going to come in and comment, well, utility rates are too high. Well, yeah, you're right, and here's how we got here, and here's how the best way out of it we can see. So there should be some kind of response coming from the city back to the public, but it mostly is their commentary.
And that's what I'm after. I'd like to have the ratio of public to council comment be in favor of the public.
I agree.
I agree.
I'm not getting any disagreement down there.
So I'm reading Calvin Coolidge's biography right now, and as far as being able to say little words, it's I'd recommend it to all of us.
So just for clarification, getting, what I'm sensing is a little bit of redirection. When we first set up the town halls, the council did direct us to provide context at the
Yes.
start of the meetings, and this is a new thing, so we've been feeling our way as we went. And so think back on the most recent town halls that we've had, variety of topics. We have provided a presentation. Some have been a little bit longer than others as stimulus, I think was the intent of the council, context and stimulus for the conversation. Are you asking us to back off on that a little bit and to provide less of that, or do you want us to still do that?
No, just want you to, I don't want to devote this time and divert this time to other causes. Context is fine, discussion is fine, but let's give them the major chance to talk.
Okay, we'll make it as short and sweet as we can.
And yes, I do think, personally, I think that context is necessary. I mean, you know, if you printed out our packet for tonight, for workshop and meeting, it's hundreds of pages, and there weren't any difficult issues. So, with the possible exception of fire consolidation. But, so it, you know, to walk in on and ask somebody for their 15-second opinion, I think is unfair to them, and it's unfair to the city.
Okay, any last comments? If not, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
We are adjourned.